Hello again, and welcome to another exciting episode of Social Studies. And I'm going to see if I can get my pointer go. Okay, as I said, another exciting episode of Social Studies. I have my pointer back. It's very exciting. All right, this is George Washington, the brand new government, parties and farewell, or farewell parties. We shall see. I'm going to try to keep this one short. Let me start my timer. Okay. And now my screen is frozen. Oh, come on. I have to do this every time. So this is George Washington, the brand new government. It's note sheet number 1. You should have this page filled in, and you should have the back filled in. At least not the whole back. You should have the beginning of the back. You should have down to about here filled in. We are going to talk about the first political parties and George Washington's farewell address. And because we will talk about this on another page as well, this is going to be pretty short. So you should already have this about the relations with Native Americans. And I just want to draw your attention one more time, because some people actually miss this, to the Canandaigua Treaty before we get to first political parties. Canandaigua Treaty is one of the most historic things to ever happen in Canandaigua. So it's something you should know. It is one of our first peace treaties as a new country, and it's between us and the Haudenosaunee, which is another name for the Iroquois Confederacy, or the Six Nations by this point they're called, um, allowing us to live in peace with them. And we've talked about that in a previous video, but when I see Canandaigua Treaty here, I want to draw your attention to it again. All right, now to the parties, the first political parties. So we start off by saying George Washington did not like the idea of political parties. Actually, if you had asked him, Mr. Mr. President, what political party do you belong to? He would have told you, I am not a member of a political party. I don't like the idea of political parties. However, despite that, they're going to begin in his cabinet. Now, what are political parties? We'll get to that one second. Political parties are people who share similar beliefs about government and try to elect leaders who share their beliefs. So, people who, you can pause here if you'd like, people who share similar beliefs about government and try to elect leaders who share their beliefs. I'm not sure if I left you enough room for all of that. Let me just look and see how much room I left you. Groups of people with similar beliefs about government, you could say. You don't have to, you can condense that a little bit. But as I said, even though Washington did not like the ideas, and just so you know, right here where it says political parties, I would circle this right here, circle it, underline it. So when I ask you in class, when I say, what are political parties? And you're looking there staring at your page, trying to find the definition, this will jump up and bite you in the nose. No, because you have a mask on, you're safe. Okay. But it will jump out at you, and you'll see it right here, what political parties are. Groups of people who share beliefs about government, and it goes this line on to this line, so you have a little extra room here. All right, but despite that, political parties began due to disagreements between members of George Washington's cabinet. Right here, Washington and his cabinet, particularly these two who look so nice sitting there together. It looks like they're maybe eating cheese. I'm not sure what they're doing here. That's interesting. I've never noticed that in this picture before. I'm not sure what that is. Perhaps cheese. Anyways, these two, Alexander Hamilton right here and Thomas Jefferson right here, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of State, they are not going to get along, and it's going to lead to the development of political parties. Jefferson and Hamilton, keep these two in mind. You don't have to write this down right now, but whenever you think of Alexander Hamilton, think he's a Federalist. He wants a strong federal government. And whenever you think of Thomas Jefferson, it's going to be the opposite. He wants a smaller, less powerful federal government. He is afraid of giving the federal government too much power. He thinks that Alexander Hamilton wants to make us British again with a strong, powerful government like a king. Jefferson wants no part of that. So these two are going to go at it many times. This is a funny, slightly edited cartoon you can read. This is supposed to be George Washington here telling them no parties. And it's funny because this is supposed to be Hamilton and Jefferson, and they're the ones who started the parties. Haha. All right, so the first two political parties were the Federalist Party and the Democratic Republican Party, or the way I have it on your sheet, the Democratic Republicans and the Federalist Party. Wait a second, you say. The Democratic Party, the Democratic Republican Party, but today the two major parties are the what? Yes, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. So there's the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, but back then, back in the day, the parties were called, there was one party called the Federalist Party, and you can probably guess this is going to be Alexander Hamilton's supporters. And then there's going to be the other party is the Democratic Republican Party. They were called the Democratic Republicans. Sometimes they would shorten it to just the Republicans, but it was not the same Republican Party we have today. So we're going to go with the Democratic Republican Party. All right. Now, what led to this disagreements? Well, they disagreed about everything, but as we either have or will talk about in class a little more, the controversy, the idea that really causes these parties to erupt is the question of part of Alexander Hamilton's plan was for the federal government to create a national bank. And Thomas Jefferson thinks that's a bad idea. In fact, he thinks that it shouldn't be done because it's not in the Constitution. It's not in the words of the Constitution. He thinks that it's crazy that you can't do something that's not in the Constitution. There's a word for it, unconstitutional. So he thinks the federal government should only do those things that are listed in the Constitution, and there's nothing about creating a national bank in the Constitution. This is called a strict construction or strict interpretation of the Constitution. So in your notes right here where it says Democratic Republicans, actually, you know what? Don't worry about writing it now. I'll give you a chance to write it in a second. I'll put it up on the screen in a nice, one, clear, concise way. But they believed in a strict construction or strict interpretation, which basically means you follow the exact words of the Constitution. The federal government only has those powers that are specifically listed in the Constitution. If it's not written in the Constitution, it can't be done, according to the strict construction. Now, this puts limits on the government. If they can only follow the exact words, it makes the federal government more limited. It can't do as much stuff. It can only do those things that are listed. And since the Constitution said nothing about creating a bank, that would be unconstitutional, according to Thomas Jefferson and the people who supported him, who came to be called the Democratic Republicans. Meanwhile, Alexander Hamilton, who remember helped write the Constitution, he knew what he was talking about here. He just had a different viewpoint of it. Jefferson also knew, he read the Constitution. He didn't help write it, but he had read it and studied it. They just had different viewpoints or different interpretations or different construction is the word they used. This is a loose construction or loose interpretation. This means that the federal government can take actions that are, quote, necessary and proper for carrying out powers listed in the Constitution. That's sometimes called the elastic clause. The elastic because it can be stretched the power of the federal government. Therefore, it's okay for the federal government to create a bank, even though it's not specifically mentioned. According to Hamilton, having a bank was necessary and proper for doing the powers that were listed in the Constitution. Now, this is what people take sides over. This makes the federal government more powerful. And some people follow Jefferson and they support him and they become Democratic Republicans. And some follow or agree with Hamilton and they become Federalists. This is what's the Constitution we're talking about here. You can read through it, you can pause it and take a look at it. It doesn't say anything about a national bank, but down here it does. This is the part, it's not really in red. I made it in red so you'd see it. They also gives Congress the power to do all these things, but also to make necessary and proper laws for carrying into execution these powers. So this is the part that's the elastic clause, as it's called. So make sure you write here the definition of political parties, and you should have written that. Why don't you go ahead and circle that like I did here? Then the Democratic Republicans, they are going to be led by Thomas Jefferson. If you want to add another, James Madison as well, but mostly Thomas Jefferson. And the Federalist Party is going to be led by Alexander Hamilton. Now, John Adams was also a Federalist, and George Washington, even though he said he was not a member of any political party and he didn't agree with political parties, most historians label him a Federalist because his actions and his beliefs agreed with the Federalists more often than the Democratic Republicans. So these two are going to disagree, but in the end, it's kind of nice to have Washington on your side, and Hamilton ended up usually winning the arguments when Jefferson and Hamilton would both tried in these cabinet meetings, both tried to convince Washington to choose their side. He more often than not sided with Hamilton. All right, so now here's the nice little summary for you to fill in these notes. The Democratic Republican Party, led by Thomas Jefferson, this is in the notes going right along, so don't tell me you can't find it. They believed in a smaller, less powerful FedGov, a smaller, less powerful federal government. Now, you don't have to write this, but that means that states would have more power. And they believed in a strict, you need to write the word strict, construction is already filled in, a strict construction or interpretation of the Constitution, i.e., the federal government must follow the exact words of the Constitution, which limits their power. You might think of a strict meaning, you might incorrectly think that strict means a more powerful government, but that's kind of the opposite. Strict means a less powerful federal government. Meanwhile, the Federalist Party, right below it in the notes, led by Alexander Hamilton, believed in a strong federal government. Underline the word strong. In federal government, it's already written there, but underline the word federal. A strong federal government and a loose construction or interpretation. They believed in that elastic clause, that the federal government can stretch its power to do what is necessary and proper. Okay, that brings us to the end of the parties. Not really the end of the parties, but it brings us to the farewell address. So this is the next box, George Washington's farewell address. Washington set, I'm just reading the pink sheet to you right now, Washington set important precedent by voluntarily retiring and giving up power after 2 terms. His farewell address, an address is like a speech, like the Gettysburg Address was a famous speech. But in this case, the speech was not actually spoken. It was written out and sent to a newspaper, a Philadelphia newspaper, who printed it. And then very soon after that, the rest of papers all over the country were printing it. This is the actual handwriting of the farewell address. It's hard to read here, but you can this is the first page and the last page. It's several pages long, but this is the first page and last page, and you can kind of make out George Washington's signature there. This is what it would look like printed in a paper. You can maybe read that there. This is just the beginning of it. So if you really want to know, if you're straining your eyes trying to see what it said, and you can look it up online, but it says, "Friends and citizens, the period for a new election of a citizen to administer the executive government of the United States being not far distant, and the time actually arrived when your thoughts must be employed in designating the person who is to be clothed with that important trust, it appears to me proper, especially as it may conduce a more distinct expression of the public voice, that I should now appraise you of the resolution I have formed to decline, turn down being considered among the number of those out of whom a choice is to be made." So he kind of shocks the world here by saying, I'm giving up power. I don't want you to consider me as a president after this term is done. So I am not seeking a 3rd term. This is an important precedent. So to make sure you have the notes here filled in, there's not many notes, but Washington, it was an important precedent. He voluntarily giving up power after 2 terms. And he also gives this advice to the United States. In his farewell address, he tells, first of all, and these are the two bullets on the pink sheet on the notes, he stated that the United States should try to remain neutral and avoid wars and alliances. And secondly, he warned that the United States government should avoid the creation of political parties, which ironically were already sort of starting in his cabinet, but he was warning against them. He said that they would divide the country and lead to ill feelings and mistrust among the citizens. And maybe he was right. But we did end up with political parties. After that, Washington retired to his humble farm. This is called Mount Vernon, and this is where his plantation on the banks of the Potomac River, not far from Washington, D.C. And he just sat on his porch and retired and enjoyed the scenery and lived happily ever after, at least for a few years before he died. But he gave up the power. Very important precedent. That finishes up the notes for you, and that finishes up the video. So have a pleasant day.